This quarterly roundtable is a collaboration between Fourth and VEF. We've been doing these for a couple of years now, and it is a forum for the consumer-owned utilities in the Pacific Northwest to learn about topics regarding transportation electrification. And we encourage the sessions to be interactive. So if you have questions, please, you can pose those in the chat, or you can ask them during the Q&A period. In past sessions, we've covered different topics, different aspects of EV charging, EV use in public and private fleets, EV car sharing, electric school buses. Today, we're going to get a couple updates from Fourth on some statewide programs in Oregon and Washington. And then I am excited to hear about these two new Cap and Invest programs in Oregon and Washington that will be introducing significant new revenue into the greenhouse gas reduction space in these two states. And at least some of that funding will be focused on transportation decarbonization. So with that, I will hand it over to Symbiot and look forward to the presentations.
Again, thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm going to do just a brief introduction of our speakers, and we will then get into the content today. I am Symbiot Yusuf. I am the Member Relations Manager at Fort, and I am your moderator today. Today, we'll be hearing from Brittany Breen, our Senior Program Associate at Fourth. We will also be hearing from Connor Herman, our program managers on the Access to Cars team at Fourth. We will be hearing from Stephen Eshkowitz, Transportation Electrification Policy Lead at the Washington State Department of Commerce Energy Policy Office. And we will also hear from Tim Miller, who is a senior consultant at Seeding Justice. And now I'll pass it over to our first speaker, Stephen. Stephen will be discussing the Climate Commitment Act. Stephen, please join me to present.
I'm going first. All right. Let me see if I can share. All right, can everyone see those slides?
Yes, we can see your slides.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate both organizations making the offer for someone from Washington State to come on and speak about the Climate Commitment Act and all the investments that are going into clean transportation. So my name is Stephen Hershkowitz. I'm the Transportation Electrification Policy Lead in our State Energy Office, which is in Commerce. And I'm actually really not the top expert at all on Climate Commitment Act. This is a program, massive policy undertaking that the Department of Ecology leads on. They are very busy implementing that work and have a number of different conflicts today, so I'm pitching in. But I'm mostly focused on the investment side of it, which I can speak to from how the investments have started to be implemented in the transportation budget in the last legislative session. And I will also give a brief background on sort of overall climate policies and how this fits in and some opportunities for utilities. I'll speak just to the extent that I can about how the CAP side of the program works, since it's a cap and invest side. But if you have more detailed questions, I'll ask you to, I can loop you in with ecology staff who can answer those questions for you. So the first slide on here is really like, what is this all about? It's about reducing greenhouse gas emissions and decarbonization. And so this policy is really grounded in the state's requirements for how much greenhouse gas emissions need to come down and the limits that are set that we need to stay under. So we are currently, and by currently, I mean the most recent data we have is from 2019, also accumulated by Ecology. We're over 100 million metric tons, which is the unit of CO2 equivalent that we use to measure emissions. We need to get down to about 50 million metric tons, so a more than half reduction by 2030, further reduced to 27 million metric tons in 2040, and then down to 5 million metric tons and net zero emissions by 2050. And you can see the trajectory of that decrease that's needed as it's been modeled under our state energy strategy on the right-hand side. So the Climate Commitment Act is one of several major policy initiatives that Washington has passed in recent years. And it's really the big overall economy-wide policy that pairs with a number of sector-specific policies that also regulate on emissions reductions. So as you can see, Climate Commitment Act here at the top caps the amount that entities that are polluting a certain amount, it just caps that, so they have to reduce their emissions, and if they can't, they have to buy allowances to exceed that cap. That pairs with the Clean Energy Transformation Act, which is our path to zero emissions electricity by 2045, our Clean Fuel Standard, which is driving a 20% reduction in the carbon intensity of transportation fuels, our requirements on new vehicle sales of both the light-duty vehicle space and medium and heavy-duty vehicle space, and then our Clean Buildings Performance Standard, which requires certain energy consumption declines in buildings over 20,000 square feet. These are the big initiatives. It's not everything that the state has, but these are the big ones in the big sectors. So on the cap side of the cap and invest policy, you can see here what the trajectory of decline in emissions is going to be between the program starting this year. This is the first year that there are auctions being held, and then all the way down through 2050 when we reach that net zero emissions standpoint, or 95% reduction. This is covering any business that is exceeding 25,000 metric tons of CO2 per year, and it covers roughly 75% of the emissions in the state. You can see here what's not in that 75% and is exempted includes aviation, marine, biofuels, agriculture, and based on a legislative change after the Climate Commitment Act was passed, landfills are also regulated in a different policy. Specific to electric utilities, I'm assuming that folks on this call are probably familiar with how the compliance works for electric utilities, probably better than I am. But just as a recap of the broad strokes, electric utilities are covered by the program, but are initially provided no-cost allowances to prevent double regulation between the Climate Commitment Act and the Clean Energy Transformation Act. There's going to be various rulemaking phases throughout implementation to align with CETA. And those no-cost allowances must be phased out by 2045 when CETA is fully in effect. Here are the auction results so far. So I'm pulling this from data that's been released by the Department of Ecology as recently as yesterday. So this works in that there are quarterly auctions that are held when entities can buy allowances. Ecology has also used some special auctions as a way of doing some price constraints. So if prices for specific allowances exceed certain levels, then there are sort of additional allowances that come onto the market to help reduce those prices. So you just a way to increase supply to reduce the price. So you can see sort of on the right-hand side, there's been 2 of those special auctions so far. These auctions are sealed bid, and once all the allowances are accounted for, the lowest bid that successfully wins is the price that all bidders pay. And an important component of this policy is that in addition to those special auctions as a way of making sure that prices don't get too high for those who are complying, there are ceilings and floors set so that they have some predictability as to what other entities are going to be bidding. On the right-hand side in this table, you can see there's been quite a bit of revenue generated over the course of the year. The largest amount was in Q2, which is what triggered the special auctions being scheduled. And you can see a more gradual revenue generation pathway by having those additional auctions. There's been a total of about $1.5 billion raised so far to date, and there'll be another Q4 auction held. And then just calling out specifically that I believe in the Q3 auction, I'm not again, there's other people with more knowledge on this, but there was specifically 184 million that was raised for utilities to distribute to ratepayers to help with any impacts on electricity rates. So for CCA investments on the clean transportation side, I'll start with sort of broadly speaking how the Climate Commitment Act revenue works. There's 3 different categories, and then within a couple of those categories, there are other sub-accounts that are created to make sure that there's at least a certain amount of funding going to those purposes. So the first one is the carbon emissions reduction account, and this is the transportation investments or decarbonization account that revenue goes to automatically until it exceeds a certain amount and then can be distributed to the other 2 accounts. And you can see there are specific required levels of funding for active transportation and transit included in that. There's also the climate investment account, which is a broader pot of money that could be used for decarbonization in other sectors, as well as carbon sequestration and ecosystem reliance. And then on the third side is about air quality and health disparities, really on the environmental justice side. And so these are investments that are made specifically to reduce pollution in what Washington calls overburdened communities, which is our term for communities facing cumulative negative impacts on environmental health. This is a slide that the governor's office shared with the legislature earlier this fall. And it shows, at least in the first biennium of funding, so Washington has a 2-year budget cycle, that this is the different funding levels by topic area. And you can see clean transportation, the highest bar, third from the right, is well above the amount invested in other aspects. There's quite a bit going to climate resilience and building decarbonization, and those orange tops are other funds in addition to CCA funding. This is a slide that the Office of Program Research, which is legislative staff, nonpartisan legislative staff in the Washington House of Representatives, shared with the House Transportation Committee a few weeks ago, and shows the planned investments by broad topic area between the 5 different buckets that have been created to spend that carbon emissions reduction account, that first one on the left that I went over. This is where that funding is actually planned to go to over the next 3 cycles, the current one and then the next 2. And I sort of highlighted the third row, which is most specifically about electric vehicles and zero emission vehicles. And then here are zooming in even more, the focus areas of those investments. So you can see quite a bit for ferry electrification and shore power at ports. And in talking to the ports, there's been quite a bit of progress made on having more ships able to accept that shore power when docked at the port, instead of having to burn more fuel just to sort of stay stationary at the port. There's quite a bit going as well to trucks and off-road equipment. This is at least earmarked currently as one-time funding that is still being designed by a legislative body sort of study arm called the Joint Transportation Committee. They have consultants that they're working with to design what a zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicle and infrastructure program could look like in Washington, modeled off of programs in California, New York, Massachusetts, and others. And then there's other funding here that has existed for some time, and some new programs that get smaller investments. So zero emission transit buses. This is a program created in 2019 that is slated to continue to get funding now out of the Climate Commitment Act at about $39 million per year per biennium. There's also additional $35 million in highway charging and hydrogen refueling stations. Most of that is for charging, but a few million for hydrogen. And then some investments in the state fleet, vehicles being electrified, a new program on e-bikes, and a continuation of pilots for electric car share programs, and then initial investment in Tacoma to electrify some freight switchers and rail. And so, okay, so if you're an electric utility, how do you look at all these investments? What does this mean for you? I sort of pulled together, I think, what are 4 key opportunities for utilities to be thinking about with these investments. And the first is, how are we going to get the distribution system ready to actually interconnect and, have the capacity to move the power through the system to deliver it at that site? And so I think there is a lot of work to be done about proactive planning, project coordination, and make ready investments, especially at a proactive level, if it can be permitted, and participating in a project that Commerce will be leading in 2024 to try to do a comprehensive cost assessment of what the grid side, utility side, make ready costs are going to be to prepare for all the electrification we are modeling out through 2035. So we'll have more on that, hopefully early next year, on ways to participate in that effort. There's a great opportunity to partner with applicants who are looking for funding in the charging and hydrogen fueling programs, and can help drive siting of that work. And then I think on the truck and bus programs, utility vehicles may be eligible for that, depending on how the design work goes. But utilities could also be working with WSDOT to support fleets to participate. And then finally, where there isn't funding at the state level, utilities do have the opportunity to invest a small portion of their ratepayer funds on transportation programs. And we think the biggest need at that level would probably be residential charging. Sorry for going over a little bit, and that is the end of the presentation.
No, thank you so much, Stephen. You did great. You're still on time. So now we are going to open the floor up for questions specifically for Stephen's presentation. And I want to say thank you again for sharing with us some of the equity considerations, how utilities can benefit from this. If you do have any questions currently for Stephen, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. So I will pause for that. I don't want to do moderator privilege because I do have a question. I will let others ask questions first. Thomas.
I'll ask one since no one else is rushing. Stephen, the projects, the funding is approved by the legislature, right? The biennial funding. And so if you were a utility that had a project, does the funding go into a specific state program that then you would try to access, like for charging or for supporting a fleet that's electrifying?
You're on mute, Stephen. Okay, we'll just wait for Stephen to start audio out.
There we go. Okay. Yeah, so utility, it will primarily be through agency programs, I think. So for example, for utility vehicles that may be eligible under a program if it's designed that way by the Joint Transportation Committee. So definitely in the medium duty space, those that would be applying to WSDOT, or that's where the program right now is planning to be administered, and they will create a program. They perhaps could hire a third-party administrator. All that needs to be sorted out. But yeah, in California, it works out where utilities are able to apply for funding to help cover the increased cost of like an electric utility truck.
And one quick follow-up on the 1.5 billion that's been raised so far. Has any of that flowed to projects yet, or is it sitting in the agencies and programs?
I believe, yeah, I mean, some of it has been awarded. I know for example, the state highway charging program, there's funding that's been awarded. I don't know if contracts have been finalized yet with those awardees, but that money will start to flow soon if it hasn't already. I'm not as familiar with some of the other programs. I think the ferry electrification, because it's money to Washington State Ferries, probably has started to flow. And then the green transit projects, those projects were selected before the money was appropriated. So I imagine transit agencies have started to get some of that funding as well. So yeah, I do think some of it is flowing, and in some other places, programs are still being designed. I mean, a lot of that 1.5 billion has not been appropriated yet, because it's a lot more than the legislature was projecting. They had some pretty conservative estimates, just to make sure they weren't over budgeting.
Thank you. Any additional questions for Stephen? Okay. I'll ask my question then. We are at a Pacific Northwest Utility Roundtable. So as some of our utilities that are on here currently, what grid updates plan should they start to implement now, and over the next 5 years to think about and build load capacity?
Yeah, this is a great central question. I think, there's a great opportunity, especially in the truck charging space, I think right now, because that's where you're going to have the largest load increases at specific sites. And so finding where your fleets are in your service territory and reaching out to them and saying, do you have an idea of when you might try to convert your fleet to electric? What's going to be the pace of that? What are you going to do, sort of one at a time or all at once? And then assess, like, on the lines that are serving the distribution feeders that are serving that location currently, are like, what is the cost going to be? Do you need new transformers? Are you going to need line extensions to some other location? Is there a substation upgrade that needs to happen, which means it's going to be several years before that grid upgrade can be made to support that fleet? That's the work that really needs to be happening right now. And we've seen this model playing out in New York, California, some other places. And we've encouraged the Joint Transportation Committee to actually have kind of a pathway in that program where people can get funding to facilitate that kind of planning work between fleets and utilities. So that would be my first recommendation. I do think that the residential side is huge. We have 98% of the plugs that we're anticipating being in the charging network being in the residential space. That's not 98% of the power, but it is a lot of locations. And I think, understanding where you're most at risk in the residential side, I think that's going to be the less risky side in general than the commercial side. But if there is risk there, like, the uptake in EVs in Washington is very swift right now. We're over 20% market share in the last quarter amongst new vehicles. So this is accelerating quite quickly, and we don't want utilities to be caught off guard.
Thank you. We just had one question come in through the chat. So light duty vehicles make up a significant portion of the transportation, and 80 to 95% of charging for these takes place at home overnight. Is there money for multifamily and single family residents within this?
Yeah, so not through the Climate Commitment Act, but there is another pot of money that the Department of Commerce received. We have $69 million a year for community charging, and we have devoted 45% of that, so nearly 30 million in our first round for multifamily charging. So that is open right now. The application window closes on December 1st, and I can put a link to that program website in the chat, and I know it'll be sent out afterwards. There isn't any funding at the state level currently for single family residents, and this is a gap. I know some utilities are using some of their ratepayer dollars, and that's allowed to fund rebates for at-home charging for single family homes. I think panel upgrades is going to be a big part of this, and making sure that people can actually afford to make that switch if needed. And I do think, well, at least I'll be working at the state level to try to see if there's a way to direct some state funding to make that a more equitable transition for people.
Thank you so much. I'm not seeing another question, and to keep us on time, I will say thank you again so much. We might have another round of Q&A for all of the speakers with time. And now I'm going to pass it along to Connor Herman, who will give us a presentation on the Washington State Clean Fuels Program. Connor?
Thanks, Simbi, and thanks, Stephen, for warming it up, both talking about things going on in Washington, and also we're wearing similar clothing, so I guess we're on the same wavelength today. So you may have caught that the clean fuel standard was mentioned lightly in Stephen's presentation, so I'm going to dive more in depth into that specific program as soon as I can find my slides. Can y'all see that?
Yes, we can.
So as Stephen mentioned, the Clean Fuel Standard is designed to decrease the carbon intensity of Washington's transportation fuels, specifying a 20% reduction below 2017 levels by 2034. One reason that this is so important is because transportation represents a very large bucket of these emissions from really everywhere, but in Washington and especially representing a majority of emissions. So this presents itself a very good opportunity to encourage some transitions to cleaner fuels. And while this isn't specific to electricity or utilities, that is an option out there for transportation fuels, and why we're talking about today. So some nuts and bolts of the program, many are probably familiar, but just to do some level setting, utilities, you're going to need to register to opt in to participate in the program. And then you can generate credits based upon a few different things. One of those is for residential EV charging. So that is calculated based on a formula related to the amount of vehicle registrations in your service area. And then you can also get credits based upon the number of public or fleet chargers that you have, which then need to be registered with the state. But there's another opportunity to gather credits from the utility side. Then there is a marketplace, basically, that utilities or anyone can then sell their credits. And then specifically for utilities, it is required to use that revenue on transportation electrification specific projects in your area, which is a little different. Oregon, going back half decade now, has had a clean fuels program, and that wasn't a stipulation. So a little more specific going into the Washington version of the program. There are also a couple other stipulations, and I'll also say currently Ecology has put out draft guidance, which you can find online, and they're currently accepting input to the guidance through December 15th, and I have the survey or the SurveyMonkey link here, which will be sent out after. So I definitely encourage any stakeholders for Washington that want any inputs and some of the stipulations here to get your voice heard, because they're still reviewing and taking in considerations. Two of the considerations I want to call out was that a portion of the projects need to affect communities experiencing air pollution. So this is basically a geographic component, that 30% must be spent in some geographically defined areas, which the state basically has some specifics around that, and Stephen might actually be able to provide a few more specifics on that in a moment. And then similarly, there's a stipulation related to the types of projects that can be that money can be spent on, and 50% of the contribution needs to be in this one of these buckets of projects, which I have listed here on the next page. So currently, where about half the money needs to be spent has to go into one of these 4 bucket types, which is EV charging infrastructure. That's pretty straightforward. Expanding grid capacity, also pretty straightforward. That's kind of more the upstream items to make sure there just is the general capacity to be able to do this transition to more charging and more EVs. And then partnership programs, public and private vehicle fleet owners. This is when it gets, I think, a little more creative with the types of programs that are out there, specifically working with fleets and spending money that can impact the market in that way. And then finally, the EVs for community-based organizations. This is specifically also another creative opportunity, but specifically working with low-income or vulnerable populations. And I think there are to be seen a lot of opportunities here, but working with social service agencies to electrify their fleet, installing charging stations, doing education, helping them with this transition, even looking into some models like car share or other shared mobility options. I think there are going to be lots of opportunities to invest in this with the specific focus on helping community-based organizations. And then pivoting slightly from the nuts and bolts, Fourth is also serving as a bit of a special role in the Washington Clean Fuels program. We've been selected as the backstop aggregator, which essentially means we capture the value of unclaimed residential EV charging credits that basically go into a pool, and then that is assigned to Fourth. And similar to how utilities have some stipulations on how that money is spent, Fourth also has many stipulations on how we are to spend this money to benefit the residents of Washington and folks around the state to advance transportation electrification. There's a large focus on benefiting disproportionately impacted communities within the areas of utilities that haven't yet opted into the program. Fourth has been the backstop aggregator role since 2008 in Oregon, so we have quite a bit of experience with it. There are some differences between Oregon and Washington, but we do have some experience in that space. And where we're at now, we've been selected. We are currently going through our contracting with Ecology, and we're developing our work plan, which will lay out very specifically how the money is spent, where it's spent, the types of projects we will be working on. But there's several buckets that we're focused on, which is consumer education and outreach, and access to shared EVs, so car sharing or fleet sharing, perhaps with consumer-based organizations, access to EV charging, and this could kind of look at the full spectrum of public, residential, multi-unit dwelling, lots of opportunities here to kind of advance that mission within that. And then access to emerging modes is sort of a catch-all bucket for everything from looking at micromobility, so perhaps an electric bike library, to e-scooters, to larger vehicle types, medium, heavy duty, even agriculture electrification. And then with all of this, we're going to need some utility engagement, because if we're going to be doing this type of work and projects, we want to make sure we're coordinated with the utilities that are in these areas, so we can work together, we can increase our impact, and kind of coalesce the missions, what we're trying to do as we spend these dollars. So definitely expect to hear from us in the future. I think TBD on an exact timeline sometime next year, and what our exact strategy will be. But looking to having an impact in the state next year as the backstop aggregator. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Connor, for that presentation, giving us the background and more information. If we have any questions for Connor, you can raise your hand, unmute, or put it in the chat, and I will present them to our speaker. And in the meantime, while we're waiting for folks to drum up their questions, Connor, why should the utilities on the call today or that are part of this listserv, why should they opt into this program if they aren't already?
I think first off, it's money to be able to put towards this work that you don't need to, I mean, you don't have to be approved by ratepayers or for the public utilities out here by your board. It is basically money, and there are some stipulations with it how it needs to be spent. But if you're attending this call today, and even if you're not, I think we see the market moving in this direction. There are going to be more electrification, more EVs, and this is an opportunity to be able to start working on that investment. There are a few stipulations, like there is reporting and some transparency requirements and how that money can be spent. So if you don't have a lot of EVs or much charging in your territory, maybe there's some considerations of like, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is the value that we're going to get enough to compensate for that? I think we have to wait for the exact formulas and those calculations for the area. But in my experience with Oregon, it's not that much work, and the industry is only increasing. There's going to continue to be more EVs, so it's also kind of a positive feedback loop. You can implement these programs which make more EVs and charging in your area, which then means more money in your area, which then you can do more of this, and then it kind of continues to feed it on itself. So highly encourage. I think we're close to having all the utilities in Oregon opted in to the program after about 5 years of doing this. So would love to see all the utilities be able to get there in Washington. But in the meantime, that's also the role of Fourth, is to take those credits that were generated and be able to spend that on behalf of the state.
Thank you. I have another question, but I'll wait for.
I have a quick one, Connor, real quick. Do you have a sense of how many total dollars per year this program is generating, both the Oregon program in Oregon and the Washington program in Washington?
I don't know total wise, but we have estimated for just the backstop aggregator. So that is the role of just the unclaimed credits. We're estimating 1 to 2 million in the first year of value of those credits. And a lot of the largest markets, right? The Seattles, the Snohomish, the Clark County, a lot of the bigger markets that we've seen for EVs are opted in. So those credits are, going to be spent elsewhere by those utilities. So I'd say just from all the rest that we're getting is a pretty significant number. So yeah, I'd say watch closely on what those final formulas are for Washington. But I mean, I know and I don't know similarly for Oregon, but I mean, PGE, obviously that's going to be the big one. They have a lot of EVs in the Portland area, but I mean, they're bringing in a couple million a year pretty easily through that program.
Thank you. I guess my final question for you is when we talk about developing programs and utilizing the funding from this program is we know the work can't be done alone. If it could be, we would have plenty of projects and programs running right now outside of what we currently have. So what are some partnerships and collaboration opportunities that could take place within the Clean Fuels program?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a ton. I mean, for example, us with the backstop aggregator, we're going to be doing stuff like education and outreach. We're going to be going to areas and doing ride and drives and doing education events. So working together with utilities to double down and use the mechanisms you have to promote events and have staff out there either learning or helping talk about this stuff, I think is probably the lowest hanging fruit. And I think just talking to us too, we have a lot of experience in Oregon doing this type of work. So thinking about creative program design or how to spend that money, happy to have that conversation and see what kind of synergies we can find between what we're doing as a backstop aggregator and what utilities are doing. And then I also think just calls like this, right? I would love more utilities to be on here. And once we're a year or two down the line with the Clean Fuels program and being able to share the projects that they're doing, so we can learn from that and other utilities can either replicate or, improve upon any models.
Thank you so much, Connor. We are going to move from Washington and we're going to be going to Oregon. Right now, we will have our speaker, Tim Miller, will be presenting on the Climate Protection Program on the Oregon side. Tim, can you join me on stage, please?
You bet. Thank you, Cynthia. Happy to be here. Let me share my screen and we'll get rolling. Very good. Can you see that, Cynthia?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, fantastic. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tim Miller, and I am a consultant working with an organization called Seeding Justice. And as I'll describe here, we're working within the Climate Protection Plan in Oregon, our Climate Protection Program that uses both names, to stand up something called community climate investments. So that's what I'll be telling you about today. It's mostly applicable to Oregon, but it has maybe some relevance for folks in other states, or if you know of programs in your state that might be interested in working in Oregon. So I'll look forward to any input or questions. Just a little, what I'll cover is a little background on Seeding Justice, and then what is the Climate Protection Plan, and then what are community climate investments. And there's a heavy emphasis on co-benefits. So I'll talk about that a little bit, and the various project types this can serve, these funds can serve, with an emphasis, of course, on transportation electrification today. And talk about the approach that Seeding Justice uses to bring these dollars to communities, a community-centered approach, and the timeline. So let's jump in here. Seeding Justice is an organization that's nearly 50 years old, and it used to be called the McKinsey River Gathering, or MRG Foundation. They've been working on sort of serving community needs by pushing philanthropy, sort of a community-led model of philanthropy to serve those communities for those 5 decades, and have recently, over the last 5+ years, served by managing several major funds like the Reproductive Health Equity Fund, or Oregon Worker Relief Fund, Columbia River Restoration Fund, and others. So standing up funds is something that Seeding Justice is very familiar with now, and has a lot of experience doing it. And brings them to the Climate Protection Program. So the CPP in Oregon was enacted by the Department of Environmental Quality in Oregon under its existing authority, but it was really prompted by the executive order from Governor Brown in 2020 to address greenhouse gas emissions. And within that overall executive order, DEQ looked at how they can address natural gas emissions and gasoline and other liquid fossil fuels through a climate protection plan. We already have a 100% clean target on the electric side of things. So this addresses the other side of our energy mix, other major side of it. So the program went through an 18-month rulemaking after like a 6-month workshop process. Finally got there to actually launching the program in January of 2022. So lots of input from a broad range of stakeholders. I was one of the rulemaking advisory committee members back then in shaping this program. And basically it sets a cap for emissions. It's very different from Washington's cap and invest program, but has some similarities in setting a cap that reduces each year, and covered entities need to bring their emissions down in line with this cap. And so you see here that the emissions through this program, emissions of the covered entities will come down by 50% by 2035 and by 90% by 2050. You see some wiggles in the line there because some additional entities are getting covered in some of those early years as a phase-in process for those entities. So you see the line wiggles a little bit as more entities are brought into the mix and then covered by this declining cap. So how does community climate investments thing work within this? Well, basically, as organizations are moving their emissions down, if they can't move their emissions down enough in any given year, they can cover some of that difference by contributing to community climate investments. And let me take you through the little flow of funds here. This is probably the best way to explain it, is if you start off with the covered fuel supplier in the middle there, they contribute what we're calling CCI funds over to this icon over here on the left. That is the Community Climate Investments Entity, or Seating Justice, which, since Seating Justice has now been selected and approved as that entity, and we're in the contracting phase now, just think of that as Seating Justice receiving those funds. And what Seating Justice will do is issue a receipt to the covered fuel supplier for those funds. And that receipt will be sent over to DEQ, and DEQ will say, okay, then we'll give you a credit for that amount of emissions. It's basically 1 ton of greenhouse gas or sort of CO2 equivalent emissions for every $123 contributed. So that's the basics of how it works. And it along with driving these emissions down, it's critical. One of the core goals is that it also drives co-benefits in the communities that specifically defined environmental justice communities. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the funding forecast of this is that in the initial years, it's probably in the tens of millions range. But over the coming years, as it ramps, it could be upwards of $150 million a year, potentially up to over $300 million a year. Now, I acknowledge that I'm sounding pretty uncertain about those numbers, and that's because there's quite a bit of uncertainty in how much the contributions are going to be received under this program. There's really no historical clear data about how much covered providers are going to be able to reduce their emissions. Whether will be a variation, obviously, fuel prices and what strategies those covered entities take in addressing their emissions reductions. Policy implementation and other policies could have an impact on this, as well as technology. And there is a lawsuit out there right now related to this program that is another layer of uncertainty. So we're working with those uncertainties in standing up this program. Again, a key part of the community climate investments is to drive benefits into what are into a defined set of environmental justice communities. These are BIPOC communities, rural communities, lower income communities, disabled persons, seniors, youth, and that's sort of the broad definition of EJ communities. And again, these investments need to drive CO2 emissions reductions, ideally in the ballpark. Well, on average, we want to hit that $123 per ton cap. That means that's a cost all in, including program costs. So we want to be aiming for more like $100 per metric ton. And sorry, per ton of CO2e, and offer benefits like also reducing air pollution, addressing water pollution where we can, wealth building and economic development, education, other, housing stabilization, and other benefits in these EJ communities. So what are some of the areas where these investments can be made? Well, basically the rule, the Climate Protection Program rule, defines 4 areas for these investments, but they're pretty flexible. Energy efficiency, renewable energy, transportation decarbonization, and industrial processes and materials. So we'll take a few more seconds on transportation decarbonization as I quickly cover the others. So in EE, naturally, everyone thinks of residential retrofits as one obvious way to bring benefits while reducing emissions in residential. Community centers and schools, you could see building improvements, energy efficiency improvements there. You could see it in small commercial or even larger commercial facilities. Installing heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, all kinds of things that'll drive energy efficiency. Renewables, obviously rooftop solar is a category that comes right to the top here, but also you could see small scale wind, you could see some biomass projects, other things that are generating renewable energy. In transportation decarbonization, and you've heard a great from our earlier speakers, a bunch of the kinds of projects we're going to see in transportation decarbonization throughout the Northwest, and the community climate investments can go to those same kinds of projects. But it could help fleets decarbonize and or electrify. It could be access to charging, especially in multifamily housing, in lower income neighborhoods, places that have been underserved or continue to be underserved by other programs. You could see shore power installations, electric car sharing. The wrinkle here is that we are going to want to measure and understand and measure the GHG reductions for every one of the dollars that goes into these programs. So it's not just installing a charger and walking away, it's installing a system and ensuring that there are enough supports and other services and things wrapped around those installations to make sure we get results and we measure those results. On the industrial side, we could see improvements in industrial processes and materials. You could see there's some technologies for efficiency in metal processing, low CO2 cement, other equipment improvements, all the kinds of things you see in industrial process energy efficiency programs. But these dollars can go beyond those dollars or pair up alongside some of those energy efficiency utility program dollars to make those go further. And then just want to note there's some ineligible projects. So while this is about reducing emissions, it's not about capturing emissions. It's not about sequestration or direct carbon capture, just as a footnote to be clear about. Again, this program will be rooted in community. So Seeding Justice is focused on this, and it's part of the rules and the goals of the program as defined over those 18 months of feedback. So we'll see a lot of community involvement throughout the state of Oregon, especially in rural communities, communities that have not had as much access to some of the programs that you've seen in Portland and the metro area, for example. So community involvement to identify problems and solutions and to help implement those solutions, working with community-based organizations and others in those communities to drive solutions. The way we're planning to roll this out is that the initial projects are going to be what we call off-the-shelf projects. So this will be working with programs that are already out there doing energy efficiency or transportation decarbonization or renewables, where we can partner with groups to expand those programs. In fact, Thomas and the team there at Bonneville, for example, is an example of a team that already has projects that are rolling where we can partner with them to expand those projects and get quick impact expanding those projects. So call those off the shelf. And then a couple of years into it, we'll begin to be able to do more of these community-led and community-designed projects. And again, this program also has the flexibility to work with both nonprofits and for-profits to do contracts and drive emissions reductions. Just wrapping up here, basically we're in the process of negotiating contract with the Department of Environmental Quality right now. And we'll start as soon as we're done with that contracting process, in Q1 of next year, we'll be ready to start accepting those CCI contributions. We don't know when the covered entities are going to want to start writing those checks, but we'll be ready for them. And then 2 months after that contract is signed, we'll need to have our first work plan finalized. All the investments that we'll make under the CCI need to be part of a work plan that's approved by DEQ with input from its Equity Advisory Committee. And once that work plan is finalized, then it'll be a matter of when the investments come in and when we can start deploying those dollars. So hopefully we've seen these dollars. Well, we will, once it's rolling, see these dollars in every corner of Oregon, and hope to work with a bunch of you utilities covering the state in your programs and collaborating with you. So that's it. Symbiot, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I think we do have a question from the attendees. Are there match requirements? Who or how are recipients selected? For industrial, would the community-based organization need to ID them? Can emitters just apply? So who can apply? What are the match requirements, and select the recipients?
Let me take the easy one first. There are no match requirements. There's nothing about match in the rules. We don't necessarily anticipate standing up a big application process, but rather working with parties and receiving inquiries and discussing with parties to co-develop these projects, especially in the early years. But yes, industrial processes could be part of that. We would hope to see industrial investments that also bring benefits to their neighboring communities. So if it reduces emissions and co-emissions, other pollutants, especially in in neighborhoods where those emissions are having an impact on the community, that would be appealing. But some of the projects may just be pure emissions reductions, and we understand that, and those may be some of our lower cost projects where we can offset some higher cost projects with some lower cost projects to blend them to hit that $123 or $100 per ton goal. Hopefully, does that answer the question? Happy to have a follow-up on that one if that wasn't spot on. Yes, it does. Good. Thanks, Jennifer.
If we have any additional questions right now, you can unmute or raise your hand and we'll go to you. And I have a question for you, because you kind of mentioned this within this program. It's going to be more of, there will be kind of a bridge in the gap between urban and rural engagement. And so in talking about that, what are the partnerships opportunities for engaging rural communities within this? And as we discussed, the equity considerations for this program as well.
Yeah, we very much look forward to talking with folks in rural communities that have projects that are already underway, where they can say, hey, we've done our first 50 houses, we're getting some good results, we'd like to expand that to another 50, let's talk about that. So please feel free to reach out to me. I'm sure you'll have my contact information from this presentation. And so Seeking Justice is open to hearing those ideas or hearing from you all at the utilities of programs of in your territories that are working well. We'll look to first off expand those, and then look to create new ones. So yeah, rural will be a real emphasis because we want to be sure we're reaching all parts of the state with these funds. They're more flexible than most of the funds you see in most programs, as long as we're reducing emissions and always with an eye to bringing benefits to communities.
Thank you. So that is a call to action for some of our attendees today. Connect with.
That's right. Absolutely.
I am just going to pause. If there's any other question, please put them in the chat. If not, we can move forward to the last presentation today. Again, thank you so much, Tim, for that presentation. And again, it is available to follow up via email. We will be sending a recap email if you don't have your
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. And finally, we will hear from Fort Senior Program Associate Brittany Bean, and she'll be discussing the ODOT Community Charging Rebate Program with some updates. We started this year with the ODOT Community Charging Rebate Program, so it's a great way to be wrapping up the year, hearing some updates from that. Brittany?
Thank you, Symbiote. I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that okay.
We cannot see your screen currently.
Oh, hold on one second. There we go.
Yes.
Alrighty. Okay. So hello, everyone. My name is Brittany Breen, and I am a Senior Program Associate at Forth on our Access to Charging team. Today, I will be discussing the Oregon Department of Transportation's Community Charging Rebates program. This program has been discussed before at one of these roundtable meetings, so I'll try not to be too repetitive and also share some statistics about how round one of the program went. Okay, so the purpose of the CCR program is to kickstart EV charging infrastructure in rural and disadvantaged communities across Oregon. The goal is to increase EV infrastructure while mutually benefiting local communities with increased visitors. The Community Charging Rebates Program, or CCR, supports the installation of level 2 EV charging stations at strategic locations, particularly multifamily housing and public parking sites. The rebate amounts are $4,250 to $5,500 per port, or up to 75% of eligible costs. 70% of the funds for this program are reserved for projects in disadvantaged and rural communities. The funding for the program is released in rounds. Round 1 launched on June 13th of this year and became fully reserved as of October 6th. Round 2 will launch in early 2024. Okay, and then, so here's a closer look at the budget breakdown for the program. There is $1.75 million in funding that is available per round. $525,000 is available for non-priority projects. $1,225,000 is reserved for projects in rural and disadvantaged communities. A single entity cannot receive more than $150,000 in rebates per round, but applicants are welcome to apply for rebates in multiple rounds. Okay, so here is the priority type locator. The interactive map shows applicants, if their project is located in a priority area. Applicants will type their project site address into the search bar, and the map will generate an answer stating whether their project site is rural, disadvantaged, both rural and disadvantaged, or non-priority. The map is currently being updated for the second round of the program. And here are the rebate amounts for the 2 different eligible location types. Publicly accessible parking sites can receive a rebate of $4,250 per port, or up to 75% of eligible project costs. Multifamily housing sites can receive a rebate of $5,500 per port for level 2 charging stations. And then multifamily housing can also receive a rebate of $750 for level 1 chargers. So to apply for a rebate under the CCR program, eligible applicants must be a business, nonprofit, or state, local, or tribal government entity. Businesses and nonprofits also must be licensed to do business in Oregon. And applicants also must be the site owner of an eligible location or their authorized agent with a site verification in place. So here are some of the costs that are eligible under the CCR program. Some of these costs include the EV charging equipment, installation costs, including labor and materials, planning and engineering design costs, electric service upgrades, project signage, site lighting, ADA compliance, network agreements, and maintenance contracts. So definitely a comprehensive list of costs that are eligible under this program. Okay, and as I said before, I'll be sharing some statistics from round 1. So on the right is a map of where funding was distributed across the state. Overall, there were 95 projects that reserved funding, with 71 at publicly accessible sites and 24 at multifamily housing sites. 79 of those projects are in rural or disadvantaged communities, and then 23 of the 36 Oregon counties reserved funding. And overall for this project, there will be a total of 375 new level 2 ports being installed in Oregon. And then also wanted to mention that of the 95 applicants, 13 applications came from public utilities. Okay, and then there are 2 ways in which you can apply for the CCR program, either pre-installation or post-installation. For pre-installation, the applicant will compile all of the necessary paperwork and complete and submit part 1 of the online application. ODOT will then notify the applicant that they have reserved funding, and then they have 270 days or 9 months to install their equipment, and then complete part 2 of the online application. Once the second part of the application is approved by ODOT, the applicant will receive payment within 45 business days. And here's the post-installation application flow. With this method, the applicant will compile paperwork and submit parts 1 and 2 of the online application within 90 days of their charger installations. ODOT will then approve the application, and then the applicant will receive payment within 45 business days. Okay, and then before I wrap up, I also want to talk quickly about a new 4th program that just launched called the Electric Vehicle Adoption Leadership, or EVAL. EVAL is a national workplace charging certification program that provides recognition and technical assistance to organizations supporting the adoption of clean transportation. It distinguishes employers and workplaces leading the charge to address climate change and lower emissions. Employers from all industries and sizes, including state, local, or tribal government entities, community-based organizations, and nonprofits, are eligible to apply. Employers gain certification points by filling out a questionnaire that assesses their efforts towards promoting clean transportation at their workplaces and supporting employees to travel sustainably. This can include the availability of EV charging, options for carpooling, biking, and public transportation, as well as incentives for sustainable employee commuting. As an EVAL certified employer, you will receive a variety of perks and recognition, including a certificate, multimedia promotions from Fourth and partners, opportunity to participate in the EVAL Roundtable work group, templates and resources, and spotlight on the EVAL website. For the first year until November 2024, the certification is free of charge for all employers. And after November of 2024, a fee will be implemented to certify each worksite. So if this sounds like something you're interested in, I would encourage you to reach out and apply soon. The certification includes understanding employee e-mobility needs, initiating planning and evaluation for the workplace charging program, incentivizing the adoption of e-mobility, expanding access to EV charging stations, and then innovation, which allows employers to showcase their sustainability leadership through innovative and regional programs. Okay, and then I believe we have about 5 minutes for questions now. You can also reach out to any of the email addresses that I have listed up here. We've got 2 for ODOT, 1 to reach our team, and then the ODOT team. And then we have 1 for eval. And then we've got URLs listed below for the Community Charging Rebates website and the eval certification website.
Thank you so much, Brittany. And we will include the emails and the link in our recap notes. And I just wanted you to say this again, so in case some people didn't hear. You did mention that from now until October 2024, eval is free. Eval certification.
November 2024. Yeah, it's free until then.
Perfect. We will now open the floor up for questions specifically regarding the ODOT charging rebate and the eval. I know I saw one come in. How is the map being updated for round 2? Will more areas be eligible, and speaking more of the rural and disadvantaged areas for round 2?
Yeah, so the update that we got from ODOT on that is that they're currently updating the map, and I believe they mentioned that they're adding a new equity layer. So I think this will allow or designate more communities as priority communities, but we haven't gotten to see that map yet or kind of all the changes that are being made, but I believe it'll be up in like the next week or so.
Yeah. I do have some additional questions, but we'll open it up for anyone. Okay, moderator privilege. So can you tell us some of the, outside of just the expanded map, can you tell us some additional maybe lessons learned or best practices from round one that will be taken into round two? And
yeah, so overall, I would say round one was a success. We reached our goal of getting 70% of funds going to rural and disadvantaged communities. I think, I mean, as you could see from the map that I shared earlier, we'll definitely want to focus efforts for round two on Central and Eastern Oregon, because a lot of it was focused on Western Oregon. So I think outreach moving forward will want to focus on those parts of the state. And then another barrier that we identified early on was that applicants in rural locations were having a hard time finding installations or installers or obtaining quotes. So for round two, what's going to be nice is we have a more hands-on approach that we can take, so we can obtain quotes on behalf of applicants and then also submit applications on behalf of applicants. So fourth, we'll be able to provide a higher level of technical assistance moving forward in the second round of the program.
thank you. I'm going to pause. If there aren't any additional questions for Brittany, I would like all of our speakers to turn on their webcams and unmute their mics. So just one final question as we are wrapping up today. If there is one thing from your presentation and the information that you've shared with us today that you want our attendees and anyone viewing this recording afterwards, what would that be? What would be the one key takeaway you want them to leave with? And I will start just as the way we had our presentation today. I will have Stephen go first, and then we'll go with Connor, Tim, and then Brittany. Stephen?
Well, just I'll make it pretty quick. To recap, there's a lot of funding coming. I think it's going to be some of it for utilities, but a lot of it for other entities in the private sector and consumers, and they're going to need reliable utility infrastructure there. And so starting the planning process with fleets and other stakeholders in your areas to plan out what grid upgrades are going to be needed is really what needs to have the most focus right now. And Commerce is excited to help facilitate in that. I know resources are very limited at the local level, and the state needs to play a role in supporting it. And then I'll also make a plug for investments in residential charging as well.
Thank you. Connor?
Yeah, I kind of already highlighted it, but if you're a Washington utility, there's still a chance to have your voice heard in the guidelines that are being formed. So go and you can do that until December 15th and opt in to the program, the Clean Fuels program, to be able to spend those dollars yourself. And if you're an Oregon utility, no matter where you are at, you've been getting your credits and spending them on programs for the last several years or just starting to, I think having a plan on how you're going to best leverage those credits and what programs you're going to spend those on is going to be really critical. So on either side of the border, there's stuff to do in regards to clean fuels.
Thank you. Tim?
Thanks, Symbiote. And bringing it to Oregon more specifically, if you're a utility serving in Oregon territory, one, I would say, this program is still shaping. It's still uncertain about its scale and when it's going to actually start delivering money. But we definitely look forward to partnering with utilities, NGOs, contractors throughout the state to bring benefits to communities and emissions reductions. So please be in touch or be on the lookout for us as we get this program stood up.
Thank you. And last but not least, Brittany.
Yeah, I think for me, we really want this community charging rebates program to be as accessible as possible. And so we're really just encouraging people to apply. Fourth is available to provide technical support in whatever way possible. And if you are planning to implement chargers at your workplace, get eval certified is my last message.
Thank you so much.